Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia InsurTech Podcast. We are joined today by Peter Tilocca, the head of Underwriting at NobleOak Insurance. Peter, you can hear in my voice a little bit of a nasally thing because I've got a little bit of a cold going, so please forgive me for that. How are you doing today, by the way?
I'm doing excellent today. Thank you. For a Monday, I'm doing well.
For a Monday. I love it. Okay, this is going to be great. Look, let's start with a big overall question. What is the most innovative thing that's happening in the underwriting space today?
I'd say it's still not happening, but it's the exploration of, all the different tools available to us today that I know when I started out as a baby underwriter, there was just nothing available. And today, having an underwriting rules engine in a digital format is stock standard. It's a ticket to the game. But on top of that, now we're starting to focus on things such as predictive analytics and segmenting risks and identifying different cohorts and how they behave. And the availability of data sources, I was going to use the word infinite, but they're not. But it seems like they're infinite because the Internet of Things has brought about data sources that we didn't previously use from an underwriting perspective to help us determine, the risk profile. And now we have an opportunity to explore that. And now with artificial intelligence and Gen AI, how to use that data in a sensible, moral way to help us with our decision making and processing.
So can we dig a little bit deeper into there? I mean, these are the things that are really fun to talk about, right? I imagine that if you were an underwriter in like 1975, which you definitely weren't, you probably weren't even alive. But if you were an underwriter in 1975, there's probably a lot of pencils, papers, big charts and stuff like that. And now everything is digital, but it's also changing much faster, right? But like in the old days, right? Things could take a little bit of time just to understand what was going on for any particular risk that you were trying to price. But now you have all these new digital tools at your hands, but you also have all this new data as well. How do you use all of that stuff to figure out what the real risks are and then how to actually price it? And where does each one of these little pieces of new technology fit in?
Can I tell you a story? I was when the penny finally dropped with me in terms of how antiquated we were in the life insurance space and underwriting space I was doing some research for a presentation.
Okay.
And I stumbled across a life insurance application form. I think it's 1910 or something like that. And I looked at the questions on that form, and I looked at the questions, a few years ago, and they were pretty much the same.
Oh, no.
In 1910, we asked about different conditions like cholera, for example, and syphilis and things like that. But the questions are pretty much the same. And I thought, wow, that's 100 years plus, and we still really haven't moved. And hence why, my epiphany, if you like, at that time in terms of trying to do things differently. So look, today, going back to your question, today, you can insert, if you like, different technologies and tools in multiple places across the process. I think for me, you've got to start off with understanding your data and understanding the predictive power of that data, and looking at who are our better risks and how do we classify our better risks. And then once you're clear about that, you can start applying technologies such as AI, for example, to help you process those applicants much quicker. Do we still, definitely in Australia anyway, we still look at what's your age and what's your sum insured, and based on that, we will ask for medical requirements. And is that still what we need to do? I would argue no, because regardless of the sum insured, if you're a healthy life, and we can determine that through other data sources, say wearable data, your steps and your sleep and whatever it might be, then why do we need to go through that whole process of requesting medical exams and bloods, which you do today? Which, by the way, clients absolutely hate being pricked with a needle.
Asked to do that,
right?
Yeah.
To take their blood for a product which is considered a grudge purchase. Again, in terms of no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go buy life insurance. Oh, and by the way, I'm looking forward to having a needle in my arm so they can take some blood out, right? So there's other data sources that can help you determine the same, risk without going through all that, making a much improved customer experience. And at the same time, look at reducing your operating costs that then you can pass on to your clients to make it a more affordable product as well. So there's multiple places in that journey where you can apply the new technologies.
Do you see people like I have my Apple Watch on, and literally before we started recording, I was like, oh, I have to go grab it, right? Because I want to make sure that it gathers all my data. It's a weird kind of addiction that you have, right? Once you start gathering all this data, you're like, oh, I have to put it on before I go to sleep. I'm going to go outside and go for a walk. I'm going to put it on so I just keep it on all the time. And frankly, before I had an Apple Watch, I hadn't worn a watch in like 40 years. Are you seeing these wearables now start to impact the way the risk management is done and the pricing and the underwriting of life insurance products in Australia?
Not yet. The short answer is not yet.
Really?
Yeah. There's plenty of data out there and reports that indicate that the general public are much more confident now in providing that sort of data to third-party users, so long as it benefits them. Okay, the old "what's in it for me" equation or question. There was skepticism a number of years ago. Oh, I don't trust life insurance companies with my data. But now we're seeing that swing to, okay, I'm happy to give you my data if it means I get a better price, I get a better outcome, and as an individual, you look at me differently to what you do the masses. But in terms of using that data today to underwrite differently or price differently, it's not really a standard operating model.
Is that a decision being made by the life insurance companies, or is it a decision being made by the people that have the data? So like individuals like I am who say, I don't want to give it to you yet. Or is it a mixture of both?
It's mainly that as the life insurance industry, we're still, as a generalization, we're still grappling with how do we use this data effectively? Is there enough? Are there enough studies, medical studies globally that show the improvement in health outcomes based on that? And then how do we translate that into our actuarial models and our pricing basis and our risk models? We'll get there, but it's not quite happening yet.
Do you pay really close attention? And I didn't anticipate talking about this, but I'm just super curious, right, from your position. Do you pay really close attention to startups, both in Australia and in the rest of the world, I would presume, yeah? Is that something you pay attention to, or?
Absolutely. I'm a member of InsurTech Australia.
You are? Okay. So you've heard, I published something with
Simone.
With Simone, yeah. Sorry,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I saw that. Yes. So I'm part of the life insurance working group.
Awesome.
As opposed to just the general startup scenarios. So again, our mission as the life insurance working group is to try to encourage that connection between insurtechs and the life insurance industry, and looking at how can insurtechs help us solve our problems that we currently face in the life insurance industry. So I'm absolutely very close to that.
So the reason why I ask is because I've done a few recordings just for different reasons with a company called ULife. And I'm curious about what you think about their strategy, not to sort of question what they're doing. We'll leave that separately, but they're trying to gamify health, and they're doing it in a really interesting way. And we can talk about that later. I'm not really so concerned about that, but this idea that like trying to help people live a better and more healthier life, right? again, it's going to impact their life insurance policy, but also gamifying it in a way that says, like, if you do these things, you'll earn these points and stuff like that. Do you feel like that's also happening? Do you see that happening in Australia as well?
So we certainly have the Vitality model.
Yep. The guys actually that started ULife actually built the Vitality model. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, we do actually have the Vitality model here up and running in Australia, which is similar in terms of rewarding people for healthy behaviours. So that's certainly up and running, and it has been for quite some time here in Australia. There's nothing else that's really followed suit that is comparable to that sort of program. There's small bits and pieces happening around the place, but nothing along those lines. I mean, Vitality, I'm not a member of Vitality, so I don't know, in terms of the insights, but there's a number of implementations globally. It seems to do well. My dentist is a Vitality member, believe it or not.
Really?
Yes.
That's great. That's great.
And he tells me that, and he's a marathon runner.
Right.
So there's no, I suppose there's no surprise that people that really actively participate in, wearing health recording devices are generally the healthier lives, because that's what they do. I mean, they're already motivated without anything else to record data. You always see the serious runners constantly looking at their watch and to making sure that they're on time, that sort of thing. I see them jogging around the place
all the time. Yeah, I feel like I'm addicted to my Apple Watch, and I guess that's the reason why I'm so interested in this, right? Because I do track all of my data, and I want to know like what the impact would be on my health insurance, my life insurance, and stuff like that. Do you think that tech, and I'm glad you sit on these panels at InsurTech Australia, because I think it gives you a really interesting view into what's happening in the industry overall. Do you think that tech has allowed life insurance companies to insure people that maybe weren't insurable earlier, just because you have a better understanding of it? And I'm curious if that's due to some type of alternative data analysis that's happening as well, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I don't think we're there yet in terms of, so if you're talking about lives that may not be eligible for life insurance products, again, I don't think we're there yet in terms of saying, hey, based on yesterday's risk models, you would have been in a decline, for example, but today, we can offer you cover. Having said that, certainly, the health wearable data does allow us to price better, and does allow us to look at, for example, someone who's got high blood pressure, but they're a runner, right? They're usually physically fit, but nonetheless they have high blood pressure. Whereas someone who doesn't has blood pressure but isn't physically fit, you can offer better terms, even though their blood pressure readings may be very similar because they're both on medication, for example. But longer term, the person who exercises regularly is probably going to end up with a better result.
Yeah, fair enough. Where do you think? I want to talk a little bit about generative AI. If I could say it, it would be easier to ask the question. If you don't mind, because I'm really curious, again, from your perspective and thinking about innovation and being part of InsurTech Australia, where that type of technology specifically fits in, even if it's not being used today. And there are two sides of it, if you don't mind me saying. One is just on the customer facing side, where it's going to use to solve problems for the customer, but also internally, right? Because I think it's two separate things, where it's going to help employees do their jobs better. So if you can attack both of those things, I'm just curious about where your opinion is.
Yeah, look, I see significant upside in terms of using Gen AI in the life insurance industry. I think, as I mentioned before, basing outcomes solely on Gen AI, whether you're in or out for life insurance, I don't think is right. So we have to be really careful, and we all know the stories about some Gen AI models hallucinating and coming up with responses that aren't real and what have you. So there's certainly the creation of black boxes to make decisions. is unacceptable from a life insurance perspective, because we have to justify our decisions based on on evidence. And so just as a starting point, just moving away from what we do today traditionally and switch, going over the fence, so to speak, into full Gen AI model is probably not something that's appetizing for us as life insurers. So having said that, there's certainly augmentation in terms of helping, the life insurance underwriters to make better decisions. Because you do some work in terms of I've done some work historically in terms of cause of claim and trying to find the better cohorts of people so that you can treat them differently or make better decisions around those cohorts. And that included looking at data sources that we never looked at before, and from a life insurance perspective. And when we analysed that data, we found that where you lived had an impact on that the socio-economic factors, in our first pilots, were quite dramatic in terms of the difference it made in claims rates.
Is there any other data sources that you can talk about? Because that's really interesting, right? I spent a lot of time recording with somebody in the United States who was building a practice around, a company around insuring restaurants. And he said something really interesting about the geographical location of those restaurants and how it changes the cover that they were offered. And I'm curious what other types of data and data sources you're using that weren't being used before.
Yeah, so I think the big one is around socioeconomic. So people talk about climate change, and whether you believe it or not, the terrible situation in LA recently in terms of the fires. And the impacts in Australia, we get a lot of, supposedly due to climate change, we get floods.
Floods, yeah.
And, if you live in a low-lying area, for example, you're likely to get flooded out. So the general insurers, look at that and price accordingly. What people don't really look at is what's the impact on people's health. If you're someone who has been impacted by a flood and you lose your home, what does that do to your mental health? Right? And so the impact there hasn't really been looked at closely, but it's something that we need to start looking at. So that's one element of the socio-economic. The other aspect of that is also how close are you to medical services? If you're 3 hours away from a hospital and you've had a heart attack and you survive, but what does that mean for your health longer term versus if you're 15 minutes away, for argument's sake?
Hadn't thought about it, but yeah.
Yeah, there's those sorts of discussions that need to be factored into as well.
So I spent a lot of time, and this episode's actually coming out. I was thinking about this before we started recording, talking to the head of innovation and partnerships and stuff like that at DBS, which is the biggest bank in Singapore. And he spent a lot of time talking about how they've built internal, what's the right word, procedures to kind of help staff along, senior staff, junior staff, it doesn't really matter, not deal with, but like how to integrate new technology in a way that is procedurally sound, right? Because again, it's moving so fast that if procedures aren't in place, and I'm curious if you can talk about how you do that too in the underwriting space and how it filters out into the rest of the business. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing you need a AI ethics committee.
Interesting.
Right. So
go ahead.
You internally, you need an AI ethics committee of people across the business, be it internal and maybe some external people who, we have a saying in Australia, I'm not sure if it resonates elsewhere around the world, but we have a saying in Australia that says, does it pass the pub test?
Yeah.
Right?
Fair enough.
So if you're having a drink in a pub with some people and you're talking about this and they all go, nah, then it hasn't passed the pub test, right?
Right. Right, right. It sounds really good, but at the end of the day, everyone's just going to go like, no way, have another beer. Kind of thing.
Yeah. So you need people who, you can, as an ethics committee, go, can we use this data, first of all? And then how do we use it? And are we introducing unintentional bias or discrimination in terms of what that looks like, what the outputs look like? So that's the first thing I would certainly recommend that people look at. If you use AI, for example, to help processing things quicker in the background, that's one thing. That's okay, right? No one really blinks an eye at that. But if you're using Gen AI and other data sources to make decisions on whether someone is in or out from a life insurance perspective, that gets a little bit hairy. And so you need people. If it was me, potentially as the driver of some of these initiatives, I might be really, trailblazing and gung-ho and want to do all sorts of things. But I need people to pull me up and go, Peter, I'm not sure that's a good idea, right?
Right. I love this idea of the pub test. I'm going to have to think of this going forward. I want to ask you this, though. You've mentioned ethics and morality. I didn't bring it up, right? Is this something that's always been a concern of yours? I mean, I think it's great. We think about it all the time in the businesses that we do. Should we really talk about this? Should we use this information that we've gotten from somebody else to benefit this? Like all these things we think about all the time. Is this it can't be a new thing for you, but has tech changed the way you're thinking about it?
It's, as a career life insurance underwriter, I suppose, weighing up, different people's medical conditions and trying to weigh up, what's the best offer I can make this person. They're in, unfortunately they have this disease or they have this, injury or whatever it might be. And so for me, weighing up, how do I, my job is not to just decline people. My job is to try to offer cover to as many people as possible, right, to benefit everyone. And so weighing up, I suppose that whole risk reward process is, somewhat ingrained in me, and looking at, and then when you see claims, right? So as life insurers, we're here to pay claims. And so when you see the claims and you see some of the stories, the people, right? They're not just, a digital imprint on somewhere. That's a real person who has had a tragedy, and they need that money to survive, right? So when you see that, that also adds a bit of morality, if you like, to your decision making holistically. And so, I suppose to some degree it's always been there, but, this is certainly heightened, the focus that we need to put on those type of issues, because we are dealing with real people. They're not just, a series of zeros and ones that we make decisions on.
It's funny. I mean, not funny is the wrong word, but it's interesting when all you really need is somebody close to you to really understand just like how significantly that can impact the way you think about almost everything else in your life. Is that fair? I don't want to get too philosophical on a Monday morning, but I think that's fair.
No, that's right. And their dependents are left behind. And if there's not enough money for them to, to live, a normal life or whatever that means for people, then it really impacts, their quality of life as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I don't know. It's been an interesting 12 months for me. So that's why I'm thinking about it in that respect. Let's just leave it at that. And you also said something really interesting about climate. And we spent a lot of time talking about this too. You can make the case that humans are not having an impact on the climate. Like we can argue about this back and forth, but you can't say that what's happening in the climate, right? The floods and the rains and the fires and all this other stuff doesn't have an impact on people's lives and on their health. That's just a fact. Right? Whether it's changing because of human behavior, we can set that aside for now and not have an argument about that. But when you think about it in those terms, I don't know. Again, we just have all this other real-time data coming into us, and being able to analyze it in real time makes it really interesting. But also the impact you said on people's psychological health and on their physical health, right? Because in the fires in LA, let's say, right, it gets really polluted. The air gets really polluted. What's the impact on your health, right? And the same thing, if you lose your house, now you're worried a lot more. So your tension gets higher, all these things. And that has to impact what's going on, I think, in people's health as well. I want to talk a little bit more about InsurTechs, if you don't mind. What are you seeing in the space? And again, we had that whole conversation, as you said, with Simone, which was really awesome. From your perspective, though, like, what is happening that's interesting in the InsurTech space in Australia, and how is that market different, if you don't mind, just from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the InsurTech market locally here is very much focused on the property and casualty space, and very much around mitigating risk and claims assessment. And, as I said before, we're trying to encourage more InsurTechs to look at the life industry and solve their problems. So, there are some very, they're all innovative, right? The InsurTechs, in terms of what they come up with, they're fabulous. And, there are, I know a couple who are very much looking at the risk and compliance area, and very much, looking at all your documents and screening those and making sure they're all consistent. Because, if you've got 100, policy disclosure statements and they're being reviewed manually, it doesn't take much to miss something. And so, making sure that, all your documents are compliant, are risk compliant. It doesn't sound like much, but it's huge, right? In terms of
I spoke to Tatiana about this a lot. It was really interesting stuff. Yeah, it surprised me too. And she was building something else, and she was like, wait a second, here's a real problem that real people are having that we can take our tech to solve. That was fascinating to me, because you're right. If your docs aren't in order, nothing else kind of matters in a way. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. I mean, that's a great example. Someone, seeing a problem and doing something about it. And there are heaps of others out there doing the same thing. So it's, as I said, it's very much focused on the property and casualty sector, and really looking at, because the general, or the property and casualty sector gets more airplay because of things like the floods, or most people, they buy a new car. What are the first things they do? They insure it before they drive it off the lot, right? When you have a baby, you think about insuring yourself, after you have your first child. Most people don't. They're worried about all the other expenses that come with having children. So it's just a different mindset, and certainly the InsurTechs are focused where certainly there's need, absolutely, and there's more airplay in regards to the P&C sector.
Fair enough. One more thing, and then I'll let you go. How do you balance the need for innovation, right? Because things are changing, they're changing rapidly, while maintaining like stable underwriting and risk profiles. Do you know what I mean? Because again, as stuff is changing really fast, you want to implement as you can, but you still have this big book you've got to maintain and manage, right? How do you balance those two things together? And then I'll let you go.
Oh, it's, I don't think a day goes by where, I get inspiration from somewhere, in terms of, and I've got to be careful not to chase the next shiny thing, right? Otherwise I'll leave everything behind unfinished. So, it's to me, it's very much about, I'm very conscious that I've put together a roadmap. Now, that has benefits and it has downsides, right? Because if you put together a roadmap and you try to stick to it 100%, it's not going to happen. So you got to make sure you're flexible enough to know, okay, that's no longer applicable. Take that away, and that just gives me focus in terms of what am I working on, and the balance is I spend at least 40% of my time looking at innovation. and 60% is, managing the business as usual, or the in-force, or whatever it might be, or what it is today. But certainly, and you've got to create that space for yourself. You've got to create that space to be able to sit down and read regularly, digest, ask questions of people, try to understand, what's happening globally, listen to podcasts such as this, and just to
fair enough
to get the brain stimulated. So yeah.
Are you a tech enthusiast otherwise, if you know what I mean?
My kids will tell you that I'm hopeless.
Hopeless. Okay, so you are then, or you're not then. I can't tell which one it is.
I'm okay. I'm average.
You're average. Okay.
I'm not. I'm not the the people that lead and go and buy the first iPhone that comes out, and
got it.
That sort of thing. I'm probably a fast follower in terms of that. Yeah. But it fascinates me in terms of what's possible.
It fascinates me as well. I am definitely a technological geek. I always have been. I was the guy in college, so this is years ago, who wanted to keep the computer center open 24 hours a day so I could work whenever I wanted. And as soon as I saw a word processing program, I'm like, oh my God, this is completely changing my life. I have to have it. Anyway, this was really interesting, Peter. You have to come back. I really appreciate making the time today to do this. Peter Tilocca, the head of underwriting at NobleOak Insurance, filled with insights. I learned a ton, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Really appreciate it.